is Richman Neumann. He's CEO of Modumate. So I have been following Modumate's releases and website for a while. The fidelity of graphics, the way they are disrupting the industry, it's incredible. And I thought I should get him on the show to talk everything about his product, his journey. So thanks a lot, first of all, for your time to do this.
It's my pleasure. Happy Friday, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I saw you studied architecture, you practiced it, you are licensed. Can you share us how you got into the technology side of this business and yeah, the whole journey?
Yeah, definitely. I the journey starts in college, of course. Studied architecture, like you said. I went to Carnegie Mellon over in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that school it's 5,500 people and it's known for its computer science department. I happened to be rooming with several computer scientists and electrical engineers, and I was being taught tools like Rhinoceros and SketchUp and so forth. I was using these tools to design pretty abstract buildings, and over my shoulder, my roommates were often jeering at the tools I was using, about pointing out the ways that the software's kind of core architecture is wrong and outdated, and how, for example, the software they're building, one of them focused very much on video games, and actually had a large part in Modumate's early journey a decade later. But he, had specific 3D based things to say about the deficiencies in this software, and the types of tasks I was doing were also regarded as highly automatable by those folks. And still hang out with them so often. I really appreciate their input, but I think I therefore kind of stepped into architecture from a slightly skeptical lens. I was suspicious of the tasks that I was being asked to do in the production front lines, thinking there must be an easier way. It can't be this many clicks to get this task done. My goodness. And that caused me to want to learn the tools down to their bedrock to some degree, in terms of figuring out the most advanced ways to use Revit family editing and the most advanced ways to use Grasshopper and things like that. I think that Dynamo wasn't really finding attraction in the firms I was working in at the time, but I understand it's also becoming an increasing platform for, increasing the leverage of architects. But I personally, I graduated in 2013. I worked in a high-rise multifamily firm called Solomon Coldwell Benz in San Francisco, working on high-rises here and in Honolulu and a few other places. Moved into some single-family luxury residential design because I, like many architects, wanted to build my own house and wanted to learn more about that process. I noticed their tools were even further behind, and their ways of using software were even further behind. And stepped into sustainability consulting. That was the most recent role before Modumate. Was 2 years spent across SF and the SF airport especially, consulting, I think, 15 of the 20 largest architecture firms in the world, trying to get their building more green and also administer their LEED certification. And I watched their architecture teams, some of which numbered more than 150 people across 60 plus contracted entities, all struggling to use their tools the right way. And if those entities did not were not able to surmount the software's weaknesses with their own internal software development teams, I felt that there was potentially space for a new ground up rethink of what BIM should do. So that's where Modumate's thesis began. And I love the comments on the side of this little platform here. Hi there, Adrian, Alexi, great to see you. Great, thanks for your comments. All in all, it's one of the boldest ways that you could tackle the problems in this space. I think that anybody writing plugins today is already fighting the good fight. But to step away from existing platforms and think of a whole new one from the ground up there's a lot of white space and risk to that. So that's been, I think, the major theme of Modumate's journey, and it's been a very exciting space that I love to play in.
I see. And like you mentioned about your college friends with computer science background, and you live in San Francisco, which is also a technology hub. Like, what about like people who don't have like such ecosystem around them, and they want to think like from a software developer perspective, how to tackle the problems they are dealing with? Like, how can we develop that mindset? Is like what I'm asking.
That's a good question. Hey, my camera's just gone fuzzy on me. Let's see if I can refocus this plane. Come back, camera. So some of the short answers are: move somewhere where there is more software. Move to the Bay Area, move to New York, move to any other types of software hubs. Ultimately, that is a very important factor that you can't compensate for with any other techniques. I mean, you can, but I'd call that, if there are 5 or 6 levels of setting yourself up for success, the location you live is one of the bottom two. It's got a very profound influence on what happens in your life, all the chaos theory of whom you meet and what types of events and thoughts you have. So move there. Take the plunge, especially if you're young and you don't have, a lot of roots or risk involved in your current place. The second thing, if you can't move, is you're probably going to have to quadruple the intensity with which you do research on these types of tasks. If you have to reach through remote or digital means to meet software engineers and get their time and have them teach you and have them talk about their pains because you can't get coffee with them or you can't just hang out with them. In my case, I met my first business building mentors through a cappella. I'm an a cappella singer. I'm actually a beatboxer and a director of 2 a cappella groups here in the Bay. And I did that through college. That's how I meet my people. I'm very musical. I applied to college for piano performance in addition to architecture. But I found that singing and a cappella was much more kind of hip and a Billboard Top 40 and also social. So I've fully jumped into the singing realm, and several of my first investors and mentors were members of my a cappella groups. So once again, it's that chaos theory that where you live and just living life in that place ends up setting you up for success 4 or more times more likely than having to do things from far away. But there are still techniques to find those people, talk about technology, learn how to code, learn about the pains that you're trying to solve and about around which a business can be formed. These are the same tasks of entrepreneurship. You can do them anywhere.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. So you mentioned about like your work experience in the architecture firm. What were the critical points or triggers which led to Modumate? What inspired you to form it, and what problem does it solve?
I will. Can I share a slide or two? I'm going to share a
Yeah,
slide or
yeah,
two from my fundraising decks. And so I will just really quickly block the screen and see if it refocuses on me here. Come on, camera. All right. Fresh look at my face. There we go. I'm sharp
yeah,
again. So yeah, I'll put this on screen real quick. Share screen. Picking the screen. This is not the exact same deck as I used to fundraise, but some of the images I'm going to bring on screen are images that I put together for a fundraising deck. So one of the things that I often catch investors up on is the fact that architects waste a lot of their labor. So you asked what were the big issues that caused Modumate to germinate as an idea in my mind, and I point to one image as the thing that once I put it on paper, everyone started getting it. This image here in red and green has been my bugaboo, the thing I want to fight and make better for architects since my first days of work. I think of the work architects do as being involved in 2 rounds. The first is choosing and composing the building's parts, and that's done here in green. All the clicks that create this green output, they leverage an architect's expertise. They improve the built outcome. They are enjoyable, and the client values them. This is the happy phase of work. But unfortunately, a lot of extra work has to go into repeating and unpacking those same decisions for a reader, like a permit official or a builder, and making all these red markings on the page. They are not the building. To make those markings does not change the built outcome. Maybe it reduces risk of execution thanks to communicating, but all that red stuff is low leverage work that does not, the expertise of that is not building design. It is communication design. And I think that computers should be putting these markings on pages. And so Modumate's vision, or my vision, was that maybe a piece of software could exist that took care of everything in red. So as you, with each click of your building's design, we can procedurally unpack and untangle everything you've designed into the right communication. But the big problems with the existing tools are that the word semantics, you're going to start hearing that word come out of my mouth a lot here from now on. A lot of the tools that architects use today don't describe the relationship between parts in a building the right way so as to correspond to the markings architects make. I think of SketchUp or AutoCAD or Rhinoceros as being truly unsemantic CAD tools with which you sculpt blobs, and there's no categorization or built-in rules about how things relate. And semantics means the way things relate. So building semantics means the way building parts relate. And Revit is pointed to as the more semantic partner or the more semantic player in the space. But even Revit has major compromises in its semantics that personally I've felt that the levels-based paradigm where every object is owned by a level is an oversimplification of true building construction into a bunch of 2.5D pancakes. And the relationship from one level to the next is often weak. the "do you want walls to attach to the underside of this floor?" question is not a good substitute for true detailing in the third dimension. And then their walls are too shallow, and other assemblies are all too shallow. Walls don't know what studs are, or bricks, or tiles. That's a far cry from the importance of a brick or stud or tile to the detailing process. So the data model that would be required here is definitely needs to be deeper and needs to be richer. And what we ended up building here was if I point to like the 2 layers of innovation Modumate's building, I mean, in summary, yes, it's fast. Yes, it's beautiful. It's multiplayer. It's easy to learn. It's web-based, and it's capable of automating drafting. But the 2 layers of innovation are, we've represented the parts of a building in a better way that can really talk to the, in my opinion, 120 or so drafting algorithms that drafters go through. And then the second layer of innovation is, by building it for the first time in 25 years, we can take advantage of all sorts of new technology and platform innovation. Unreal Engine is our graphics and application engine. It helped us build this product faster, through all of its off-the-shelf little toolkits for input handling and saving and multiplayer networking and so forth. And all of our documents live on the cloud. Everybody touches them using, up to 16 players can see each other working, and every time you do an action, it's told to the central server, and all players get the reaction. So it's instant. All the assets you can place in the scene live in a cloud library, streams to you. All the documents you can make can be hosted on the cloud. That's one of our major foci of this last few months, is moving from just PDF exports and Excel files and so forth to having the option to share by link the deliverables. So that the business workflow can be a fully cloud workflow if you so want. Architects have powerful machines, so we still think there's benefit to, or offering the chance for them to locally install the piece of software. But even if you play a multiplayer game like Counter-Strike, for example, you'll install that locally, but the server is still in the cloud, and your experience is still multiplayer. Being in the browser and being multiplayer are 2 different things. This is a truly multiplayer app that can be either accessed through a browser pixel streaming session or a locally installed app. All in all, basically, it's a ground-up rebuild of like the next generation of Revit, for example, and it's growing, and it's definitely suitable for kind of the long tail of small building design, and that is a function of our growth trajectory towards bigger buildings. That the ideas behind Modumate and the technology decisions we've made are all in pursuit of serving all buildings at all scales. So it's a kind of a few years of building fundamentals, and I think we're starting to see the hockey stick of market applicability of this product, and I'm excited to see where it grows next.
This is incredible. If I was investor, I am sold, like, with the pitch. Uh, but I was about to ask, like, when you were like earlier started with auto drafting, then I was thinking there are various ways to solve it, either be a plugin or standalone software. And then you touched about the semantic part, which made totally sense, where you need your own data structure and you can't rely on this uh, traditional softwares.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, doing things like here, I want to see your face some more, so I'm going to unshare. But the doing things like automating the detailing process, which you might understand if you've used Revit, you probably know that all sorts of firms are strategizing on ways to compensate for Revit's lack of support for detailing the model, and they've either got these really rich detail families that they kind of drop in top of these drafting views. They will drop detail family components on top of a wall, so that all the caulking and the little channels and additional pieces suddenly live kind of in annotation space, but the model's not really getting enriched. The assemblies don't know how they are supposed to be modified in the context of other assemblies. At that junction where the floor and wall meet, or the roof and wall, or whatever it is, at that junction, something has to change about that assembly, and Revit doesn't know. So humans are spent describing that, and every firm's coming up with a different solution, fighting upstream against the software not designed for it. So, I mean, I think there are some algorithms like the tag all button. That was a very low hanging fruit to automate drafting. It doesn't do things perfectly. Tags end up in problematic places. I bet a better script could be written that does that better, as an example of an automatable thing, even in Revit. But I think that Revit is going to end up, even if Revit's team suddenly just awoke from their slumber and started pursuing auto drafting full time, they would find themselves challenged to correctly, for example, deploy the right elevations for the building at all times, or the right sections, because the relationship between assemblies in the third dimension is the weakest. Anyway, I scoped this problem out as being a Revit plugin on day one and realized that could get us maybe half or a quarter of the product we hoped to build, but it would leave a lot of the platform innovations on the table, and it would not deliver a full revolution where all that red stuff can be automated.
That totally makes sense. And even like I was thinking, so Revit can do like 3D to 2D like mapping for floor plan, but once you get into detailing, the detail to detail correlation is not programmatic, and like from one detail modification back to 3D is also not like uh, relational. So there's like this big wide gap of like how things work in that in between space.
The fact that we're dwelling on details makes me want to just put Modumate the product on screen here. I think I'll take you on a very brief demo. So I'm just screen sharing now. Hopefully you can
Yeah,
see the Modumate
yeah.
application I'm running here. I've got a Modumate scene, this simple little kind of like one bed, one bath ADU for the back of somebody's property. It's just, I think, a little more than 1,000 square feet. So not the smallest ADU, but also not a very large building. And the data model here in Modumate is that there are 4 layers. The first is what we call our massing graph here. It's a diagram of the building that you lay out much like a SketchUp model. You lay out lines and planes and so forth. Then onto every element of this massing model, the edges and all this other stuff. This is a map of where the assemblies go. Onto these assemblies, or these planes, you can then host the assemblies that give it thickness, and you can relate that assembly to the plane. If I open up the BIM definition of this assembly, we see here the definition of what's inside that wall is a series of layers, the gypsum up through the exterior cladding. And deeper than Revit, these layers know what modules they are arraying in space. So the layer, as we model, we're keeping an area of all the layers, but we're also dividing by the size of the modules to give you a count of the gypsum boards, or to give you a lineal length of your 2x6s, and the number of planks on the exterior, for example. So adding and customizing these layers is a very flexible thing. You can add as many as you want, rearrange them, delete them, swap them out for other ones in your library. They get linked together so that in this wall, if you put in a 2x6 stud layer, which is, I'm not, are you in the US or are you abroad?
US. I'm in SF actually.
You're in SF as well. Wonderful. So you're probably familiar with then wood stud-based construction,
Yeah.
and 2x6s are a very common exterior stud. This layer may be used in other wall types that have different claddings or have different other layers to them, but the layer gets linked so that we have one total count of the 2x6 lineal lengths across all the wall types. And so this tree of BIM objects down to the studs and the other parts is what gets hosted on the what we call our massing graph. And then on top of that, we have then the finishes and furniture, where you can create many regions for the different finishes laying on the face of the wall. In this model, we chose to put the exterior cladding into the wall assembly because it's so uniform. But if you had regions like a finished transition, there are some surface graphs, as we call them. These extra white surfaces where you can optionally subdivide the regions of finishes, in such as we've done on the interior of the model. And then onto that, you place your finishes, you place your furniture, and I can use a cut plane here and cut it open, and we see ourselves the kind of dollhouse view of this model. So I could turn on ray tracing real quick, and so built into Unreal Engine, we end up with kind of a much more realistic rendering style than other apps can do. And I've recently, I think I have a little bit of a GIF here that's shows our migration from Unreal Engine 4 to Unreal Engine 5 coming up in the next little month or so, that makes the ray tracing side much more performant and able to be the default style. So ray tracing is kind of a bit of a Lamborghini mode right now that slows the computer down. And thanks to Unreal Engine 5, the ray traced approaches they use with their Lumen tech are very novel and reduce cost by a lot. So I'll turn that back off. This type of view then can be put on sheets. So we do have the drawing production tools available over here as well. If I come over to, it looks like I already had a sheet open. If I come over to this sheet here, there's a bunch of drawings coming up on this canvas. So the cut planes can get dropped. You can annotate these with tags and dimensions. And I would call these the drawing designer being in beta state right now. So right now, Modumate's a great partner to AutoCAD-based workflows, where the cut planes get exported to DWG. And we aspire to bring all that into one platform and really become kind of that 2D, 3D. Revit replacement is the wrong word, but I think our roadmap entails building a deeper semantic model than Revit, melding with Revit such that we now have data homes for everything in a Revit document, including its sheets, becoming the second half of Revit's missing brain, running a series of very powerful automations, and allowing, instead of just like a twin motion live link or Enscape live link that's just pretty pictures, this is like a semantic live link where we have finished your dimensioning and detailing. We can pop that back onto your sheets. We can automate your detail callouts, et cetera, and take care of the creation and pagination of your views. And it's because we can traverse the model more richly. So it's almost like I don't think it's a wise business decision to go out and try to replace Revit. A lot of firms are betting heavily on it, and it does have its strengths. So what we see is wherever it's still weak, we can be the missing half to its brain, and then create the live link that we become an environment for unprecedented automations. We save Revit users a lot of time, and if they like our tools and we want to keep on adding tools that are similar to Revit's and they want to spend more time on our tool, that's a bonus. But ultimately, it's like this was the fastest path to helping all those pained Revit users.
Yeah, and I totally love the UI UX experience. It's very lightweight, very performant, and the utilities you have is.
Thanks. There's actually one thing I did want to point out. This massing graph, we talking about details earlier, and that's the whole reason I brought this demo up. Details are one of the things where I was just like, it's a shame Revit stopped at the level of understanding details very well. And a polyhedral graph representation of a building finally does describe details the right way. Where this boil out of what assemblies come together is a polyhedral graph representation of the exterior slab edge for a building. So you got the above grade wall, the below grade wall, the floor plate, and indeed that's what's hanging on each edge here. But the important thing is that this edge isn't just the place where you could host like a beam, for example, a rim joist to the floor plate. We could do that here. We could host an extrusion that lives on this edge, and as you stretch the model, grows with the edge. That's cool. But more importantly, this edge knows that it is the site of the intersection of its three neighbors. And so this edge it currently possesses an edge detail. This edge detail has instructions for all neighbors, the wall, the floor, and the above grade wall, for how its layer should be extended or retracted. And in the future, we aspire to make all the different little ancillary pieces like caulking and backer rods and vibration pads and stuff like that live with this detail, so that whenever these three assemblies come together, this detail jumps into action and knows how to modify the neighbors and add new content. So this detail definition, if I start playing with it a little bit, let's take a look at, for example, the wall exterior layer here. We see that there is I'll make it not detailing, not default. We see an above grade wall here. We see the exterior red oak planks are extended 10 inches. If I made this 0 inches and 0 inches, then we see that I've just changed the extension of this exterior cladding layer with respect to the green line. 0 means come right up to the green line. Don't go past it. But I could extend all sorts of layers to and from each other using these little coefficients. And kind of we're working on making this less of a spreadsheet and more of a grab handles to pull and design. But as I do this, if I type in, for example, I'll go back to my 10-inch number, 10 inches, you can see here that it changed at this edge, but also it changed over here. This edge on the far side of the door is another location where the same assemblies are coming together. So the definition I'm making is actually shared across these edges and indeed across the whole project. So I'm detailing the model in 3D and it's carrying across this polyhedral graph. And if I cut this model at that edge like this, I make a little cut plane. This cut right here knows it's passing across a graph edge that decomposes to a point in this new 2D graph on the cut plane. This point knows it is a detail and it knows who its participants are much better than Revit models that are often very weak at the junctions between levels. So honestly, you're one of the few audiences with whom I can go so deep and get so ranty about details. With most investors and other types of business builders, they don't really care about these specifics too much. They're more zoomed out. But anybody who's built construction documents probably knows that this is a serious pain. A lot of time and waste is spent coordinating details and working on vertical sections in a way at Revit, I think, is one of Revit's biggest weaknesses. So I'm speaking about it at length now. But anyway, that's my diatribe about how detailing has been improved here in Modumate.
No, like the process itself you went through of explaining how like it's the graph relationship. Like I haven't seen such kind of like tool or development before, so like it's very innovative way you have developed this whole app.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so you mentioned like this could be the second brain of Revit. So you're expecting that the user adoption is way easier when you like capture it rather than like a standard alone platform, or like do you also plan with other ecosystem integration where with Rhino, SketchUp, where they don't have that high level of semantics?
Yeah. The good thing about having the deepest semantic model amongst the entire ecosystem is that anybody else maps into something about you pretty well. So a SketchUp model, you can see how a SketchUp series of planes would map to a massing graph quite nicely. There's some difficulty when somebody sculpted a bunch of studs and claims to you, these are studs, and they're spaced at 16 inches, but there's no rules the software is aware of to make that true. It was just a coincidence they sculpted that. There's a bit of translation issues with unsemantic tools trying to export into this product, but I believe any SketchUp user or Rhino user could model a massing graph in one of their tools and and import it. I mean, we have not built these import tools. Import export is a major component of, like, I would call it our Act 2 roadmap. Act 1 was getting the right product, the right core semantics and a platform. Act 2 is kind of hooking into the greater industry. And so your question had multiple facets. One is like, what's the right distribution model here? What's the right part of the market to try to approach? Um, and so I always try to follow the money in some regards. Architects aren't known for kind of running their businesses in super financially cutthroat ways, but they still do waste a lot of time. And because they're a services business who sells their time, that's a lot of, their revenue on their project getting spent on painful tasks. And the most pain is felt at the biggest firms. So in general, the two theories I had were, and the reason why Modumate from day one has been focused on enterprise level problems and bringing them to market. If it fits the market on the way, that's nice too. Is that A, they have the most severe problem that might result in financial success for us if we solve it. And B, they have the most complex problems, so that if we solve them, it's very likely we'll have solved all the less complex problems of the rest of the market.
God, it makes totally sense. And building on top of your like the strategy of enterprise, like we know how difficult it is for a new technological software migration or adoption in any design firm. So any lessons you learned along the way, like I've seen theories of people finding technological champions and then like do a bottom up approach or a top down approach. Like yeah.
Yeah, that's gonna vary based on the industry. What I found, product led growth very much was already a thing in 2017, 2018, but it really came into vogue in 2021. Um, and the theory goes that you build a product that explains itself and has a very fast time to value, where they created true value for their business in 15 minutes or less, let's call it, or some very short period of time. They can convince themselves to come back to that product and say, I just made myself $60 in value for free, and I could do it again for only $10 a month, and I have to do it every week. This makes perfect sense. I should pick this tool up. I learned it myself. And I think that that's a great fit for very simple products, and a great fit for businesses who encounter that little pain needing solved many times a week or month. Um, there's a different strategy that's available, like the partnership approach that one must take when building a much deeper software. The benefit of building a deeper software is that becomes the beating heart of an organization. You can imagine Revit-based firms, for example, think of Revit as like the single strongest workhorse to their revenue creation. They wouldn't part with that without a fight, or without an extremely clearly superior alternative. And even if there were a 10x better solution, the point I was driving towards is their business doesn't start new Revit projects multiple times a week. They are jumping into these projects for years. So the likelihood of the opportunity to arise to pick up a tool comes around rather scarcely. So you have to build up these partnerships well in advance and find the champions and have these kinds of outbound sales conversations where you're building up trust between your own team and vision and their needs. And there's a bit of like a time lag that you have to plan for between their business is kind of cycling and new projects spin up maybe across the whole from every um, couple of weeks. They take on a new high-rise building, but the specific champion you've got is probably on the same project for the next year and a half. And within his or her sphere of influence, there might be a few months before the next team that they're in reach of can spin up a project. So a few months is a significant delay. That invalidates most product-led growth approaches. They may see a lot of value in your tool, and you may have it available on the website, but they're going to come to your website and not have a use for it right now. And they'll have forgotten about you by 2 months later. So product-led growth, I don't think of as being a good fit for design of buildings, the way that architects make money from that. But if they do something like, if the tool it helps you fetch input from a teammate, or like if you're in CA and you construction administration and you're handling dozens of RFIs a week, if there's something that helps you automatically answer every other RFI, there's a good chance that that tool would be adoptable, assuming it's simple enough to use. Anyway, rambling and thinking on my feet here a little bit on the call, but definitely with this size of customer, this length of project duration, and this complexity of product, like time to value is what we call it. And here it's long, but also the value that's created is profound. So it's proportionally still an exciting product, but requires different adoption techniques to get into the market.
I see. Like, I really like the way you logically put the whole product-led growth and how it doesn't work here. Like, it's very like, it's not you will find on internet. It's very the person who has worked in the industry knows like the cycles and how it will integrate. So
Yeah, so I was coming to this call with, I did want to say one thing to any aspiring architect or structural engineer or somebody working, or a superintendent, wherever you're working in the AEC space right now. I think that like some of the things I'd say are, you're currently becoming an expert at something that most people aren't. That's important. If you wanted to build a company, you need to have a few things in this order, in my opinion. The first is deep expertise in a valuable problem. So the good thing about construction is that it is $1 trillion industry in the US and 10 trillion in the world. So almost any pain experienced in it in the aggregate is a very valuable pain to have solved. So becoming very expert at the possible solution of one of those pains. I mean, not just experiencing the pain, then you're good at complaining at parties. But if you're an expert at solving the pain, then you have the kernel of an idea that can start to flock co-founders, early employees, investors, etc. You must find a pain that needs solving and become extremely expert at that pain and the psychology of the people experiencing that pain in advance of your eventual sales to them. And if you have a specific vision around how to solve it, even if it's not crystal clear what buttons should be in the UI just yet, but you have some deep philosophy about how technology solves it, that's where I think the kernel begins. But the kernel alone is at risk of just living untapped in a closet somewhere if you don't also have a network of other people that can galvanize around the idea. Because businesses are just people at the end of the day, and investments are just people. So that's where I think, in addition to deepening your expertise on your problem and developing a vision around how to solve it, you also must build a large network of people who find value in you. Give them things, do things for them, make them feel like you are a high performer who they trust, they want to help out, etc. And when the business forming moment begins, you're going to call on that entire network and shake every tree and probably not end up with enough leads. And so I think of step one as develop your expertise and vision. Step two is develop your network. And then step three, unfortunately, after those things have begun to boil over with interest and you're feeling the time is right to start a business, saying, my network feels rich, they're all excited about my vision, I feel like I've got some opportunities here, I'm going to jump. Every single time you don't have enough interest to 99% of the time, that's not enough to actually get you a company formed, some kind of capital, whether from investment or revenue, and a founding team all done. Some founders are going to, some co-founders will suddenly get cold feet. Some investors will get cold feet. Some problems with your idea will show up. Some like trends in the industry will shift. And there's no substitute for just working really, really hard, getting 4 times more things done with every hour of your day than the typical person you were working next to in the company that you jumped out of. Without that and an endless amount of that kind of grit, like you need to be like the 99.99th percentile person who's never exhausted by hearing no, and there's no problem too large or too unstructured for them to puzzle through a solution. That's where you're going to take the boiling energy of your expertise and vision and your network and actually fill in the gaps to having a real business.
Got it. Man, I must tell you, you would be a great motivational speaker and TED talker. Like,
It's from standing in front of a cappella groups, man. You got to talk them through the emotion of a song and things like that. It's yeah, it's I agree. Like, and honestly, I was just talking with somebody who ran a $2 billion business about an hour ago, and he's one of my angel investors. And watching him operate, I felt exactly the way you're probably feeling when you watch me operate. If I look like a well-oiled machine or like a good synthesizer of ideas to you, this person puts me to shame. It's a constant growth journey. I was much more in your shoes 5 years ago. I am where I am now. And I bet 10 years from now, if entrepreneurship continues to be the world for me, then I'll be closer to his shoes, and I hope so. But this is the kind of energy hopefully you're seeing in action. Once you can actually embody this energy, bring the expertise, wow people with it, bring the network, and that they're the people getting wowed. Little bits of what you're seeing from me now were the reasons any success happened in 2018.
that's amazing. I am inspired for sure. So like you mentioned about the pre-seed phase. I was curious, like right now when you show the platform, it's very advanced. How much did it took for you to build your MVP? How did you prioritize? Like, if you can walk us through that journey.
We fundraised without a product. We had some initial prototypes built on a few weekends of what it might look like to design a building in Unreal Engine, but we're always very clear in fundraisers that this was not the product. We would not build on top of this. There was the semantic exploration required to solve the problem had not occurred yet. They were investing in a team with the understanding that this team is chasing the problem the right way. Venture capital investing is a power law business where they'll do a lot of investments and most of them won't work out. And then 1 or 2 of them will be so powerful because software tends to eat any industry that it really actually cracks the nut of, that makes them their money back. So I think that while it's probably in this kind of environment, in this kind of economic climate, very important to have a working prototype. And it's probably more important that your working prototype actually accrues towards the product that you'd like to build longer term. It's like it's the bones of your real product, not a throwaway. I don't think that the opportunity is closed if your presentation is compelling enough and the vision, the problem, description of the problem, vision for its solution are all concrete enough, and your team is trustworthy enough. In my case, the very first engineer to come on Modumate's team had 15 years of software development experience at EA and Maxis, working on the Sims and SimCity franchises, and 25 total years of game dev experience. So between him having seen every road bump that can come with developing software and a lot of empathy for building design, and then my specific vision of the data model problems, the VCs trusted us and said, compared to somebody who doesn't know the architecture space, you have the domain fit. That the risk now is As you encounter road bumps, will you steer around them correctly? But we trust you enough to take this bet even before a product's been seen. Um, so yeah, I mean, I guess having said everything that I've just said, I'm curious to hear a little bit about Guru, 3D Guru. Is that how it's pronounced? Where are you at
Yeah.
with that journey?
Yeah. So we started, like, we built the first prototype in last December, and then we were working on the side and made a full launch 3 weeks ago. Have 500 plus signups, and we're constantly onboarding beta users. So we have a functional product, and would say, like, we are now prioritizing the features to build to have that stickiness factor. Yeah.
So what is the pain in the market, and what is the size of that pain in dollars? So who feels the pain? How severe is it for them, and how many of those people are there?
Ooh. So essentially, like, this is a go-to MLOps or 3D design ML platform. So there are people who have, like client brief to rendering pain, where there's a longer feedback loop. You can easily go to a platform and reduce from days to hours. So there's big, like, we are chunking out like early stage and schematic design market and boosting the productivity. And there are like millions of designers who can use this early stage user platform to sell it, like, to do their job faster. But
So
ultimately, we are developing our own AI engine, which is gonna provide 3D intelligence as a service.
so the people who are paying you money, or who you want to pay you money today, are interior designers, and they is it the long tail of kind of sole proprietor interior designers who are trying to make over a room, or is it architects in enterprise firms who have some kind of use case? Could you describe that use case and the way they solve their problem today?
Yeah, so currently we are focusing on the niche of, like, residential and multifamily housing, and you can do anything declaratively. Is So we are focusing on that, interior designers who are in the space.
I see. Okay, and how much time do they spend on the commensurate activity today, and what tools do they do it with?
Yeah, so right now, like, it takes at least 5 to 7 days for, like, jumping into various software, from like sketching to modeling to rendering to presentation. We are providing, like a vertical SaaS, if I can say so, where we you can start with the presentation, like client brief, and in our platform you'll be able to generate the client ready presentation. So if you want, like, few tasks you need in Photoshop, we have like few clicks which can automate for you. So only providing just the features you need to get the job done, and, like, that's where the whole value is.
Interesting. So for these customers, the majority of their money gets made through this deliverable, or like is I guess what I'm wondering is, out, as you said, 5 to 7 days per turnaround time.
Hmm.
Is this pretty much what they do day in and day out only, or is that the beginning of some longer project? Is this like, I'm trying to figure out what percent of their year is spent on this task versus others?
Yeah, so let's say if they hire an interior designer, typically it's 4 to 6 process from, like, start to construction drawings and deliverable. We are focusing on, like, the first two deliverables of schematic and schematic, like conceptual and schematic deliverables. Out of the whole other construction drawing deliverables, we are not focusing right now.
Right. And as far as I understand this industry, the at the very first thing you show them, especially with interior design, can be 3D, can just be perspective views. But there's ultimately some kind of a tie back to real world products, or also to dimensioned 2D drawings sometimes. I think the more, when I think about the market opportunity, the long tail of informal, like the kind of cheapest designers to engage, will deliver you back only some kind of a mood board and some kind of 3D rendering. Um, but if you want to take that into more permittable documents with any kind of permittable scope, or you want, um, a bill of materials that you can actually go shopping for at Home Depot, or Etsy or whatever, it takes a bit more semantics. Than I'm like, basically, as somebody who's also been looking at the generative AI space, I've always been curious. Making a pretty picture of an interior space with 3D Guru, or with Midjourney or something, um, is one thing, but getting semantic documents is like is the next layer that none of those big companies are even trying to attack. Any thoughts about what types of semantic deliverables will be within reach for you?
Yeah, so actually this is like it's not it's building on top of the semantics engine. So you declare it to say make a living room of XYZ dimension, add a furniture of this. So it places in 3D. So all of that
Mm-hmm.
metadata we are storing. And while generating render, like it's building on top of the snapshot of like that render. So again, you can go back to the 3D model, export in various file formats and use it. So it's not just like a 2D level, it's a 3D.
So, for example, one thing that when I saw, I think I saw a product demo of that you shared on LinkedIn, and I was very excited to see it. And something that came to mind was in that room, I bet someone's going to ask for a kitchen, and kitchens are built up of cabinets, and they might ask for a kitchen, a large kitchen, or an L-shaped kitchen, or something like that. But before you can actually execute on such a kitchen renovation, you need to know more about the size of each cabinet box and the arrangement or the some of the construction techniques that were used to build it. Maybe not to super deep levels, but which plumbing fixtures and which lights and other products that the written prompt may have some high level descriptions, but there's a gap between L-shaped kitchen and these 13 cabinet boxes of these sizes with these hardware. Um, so are you? I mean, is that the space that you're saying like we want to connect those dots and build the semantic data that is capable of taking a shallow prompt and fleshing out all the richer semantics?
That's a great question. So yeah, we are actually like codifying a lot of the intelligence which you may find on like algorithms or like building codes. So you like there's a big thick layer which is gonna develop on top of this large language models or foundational models, and we have written our own like validators where okay, LLM, let's say ChatGPT will say just design a room of this dimension, but like then we have like set of checks where okay, does it make sense? Is this like locality, like for what are the different types of kitchen like L layouts or other, and even like have that other layer of validation, and then if the LLM doesn't make sense, like reback and like there is a re-ask framework which you can go back and forth until it makes sense and it validates your logic.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I there's lots of different ways that we're so early in the generative AI world or like era that exactly how you productize the different opportunities is not yet clear. So, I compared to building an Unreal Engine based app, the data model there also was a bit unclear, but a lot of the kind of how do you build the product type of questions were off the shelf answered thanks to being Unreal Engine. So, um, I applaud the bravery to go and build a product in this burgeoning new space.
Yeah, and like we are still early, we are like in the product market fit stage. So yeah, I appreciate the questions and the ask.
Sure.
Yeah. And like moving back to Modumate, but actually, I think one last question. I think a lot of people like me who are so we are in the fundraising process, and pretty much we have functional product. We want to sell the vision of like this, and we are meeting investors. Any tips you can share for people like me and other founders?
Um, in one sentence, it would be good to be able to describe the size of your market in numerical terms. Are you able to describe if everyone in a given market used your tool to solve their pain, how much money you'd be earning?
Yeah, we have like 2 billion per year subscription for 12 million designers and other.
That's globally or in the US?
It's globally.
Gotcha. So roughly, I might expect maybe a quarter of that to be in the US or a fifth or so. So 400 million US based TAM. Um, interesting. And is there anything that you can add to that vision? One rule of thumb is like technically that $2 billion is more than 1 billion, and there's a rule of thumb about $1 billion TAM helps an investor understand the possible outcome in the risk context of that power law I described earlier. It's like we're probably going to lose all our money, but if the moonshot happens, it's going to be moonshot of size X, not just size half X. Um, so it's a good first answer, and I wonder if there's a way to um, add parts to the total TAM assessment by saying, okay, that's Act 1 of our roadmap. Actually, Act 2 also takes over this set of pains, solves this set of pains, for which they're willing to pay twice as much, or a whole new set of people are willing to also start paying. And by adding it all up, Act 1 TAM is 2 billion, Act 2 TAM is 5 billion, and Act 3 TAM is 10 billion. I don't claim to know what those problems are, and for each one, you're going to have to sell saliently the connection between how your tech works and how that problem needs solving, and demonstrate expertise in it. So that's the problem. You can't just kind of spin buzzwords together. Investors are too smart for that. And I'm not trying to talk about them like they are an audience to be deceived. They are very smart people and very good people taking chances on the world's riskiest and possibly most beneficial technologies. So I love the VC community very much. They are just a tough audience for good reasons. Second piece of advice, in one sentence, what's the best thing about your team?
We are domain experts who are very early technological adopters, so we can codify what we know and leverage the best tech to get the job done, which will be valuable. Oh man, I should be better at like.
That's okay. No, it's cool. This is the exact kind of hot seat that you need hundreds of reps in before you start getting yeses. Um, what I'm curious. There's a 2,000 people just like what you just said. What makes you better than the other 1,999?
Like me, just myself, or my co-founder along our
Which of
team.
you is are you more impressed by?
We both have unique skill sets.
Then for each of you, what's the
Yeah.
answer about why you're the best person?
Yeah, like for myself, like I have the multidisciplinary background, like architecture and engineering, which even if those 2000 have, it's a very small pool. And I know like I've been coding and doing AI applications early when this was a hotbed. So yeah, I can't even say, but I can execute. I'm just want to say that.
Yeah. What about your co-founder?
Yeah, she has 13 years of design and construction experience, and she's also like a generalist technologist. So the way we both have like, she can do the front end UI, I do back end MLOps. So it's very complementary, and we ship features very fast. Like if you see a new development today, tomorrow it will be in our platform. That's the speed we are talking.
Yeah. So my assessment of the team summary there is that if you so it sounds like, does she also have domain experience when you said design? Is so coming
Yeah,
from the AEC industry, and you also come from AEC. I think I saw Perkins and Will on your
yeah,
background list.
yeah.
So I think therefore you both first strike me as domain founders, and your expertise, your day to day, like 10,000 hours, 2,000 hours a year of like paid profession was in design and industry stuff, not in building AI tools. So you're learning that, you're deepening rapidly on that, and excited about that, and you probably are among the best architects to do that. But until someone on your team is, one thing I would advise is like every area of risk in your company vision should be de-riskable in the backgrounds of one of your founders. And I'm not, my initial sense of the list you just provided is that I don't see the world's best AI tools developer amongst your team. It seems like in order to pull off the semantic enrichment stage that I sense as being important here, um, you're going to have to not just scrape a bunch of the data sources and cleverly build up a little repository of unique data that nobody else thought to build up. You're going to have to actually come up with new engines to create data and new models entirely, that haven't been pioneered before. I'm aware of some big problems with 3D diffusion because 2D diffusion is already so expensive that diffusing across voxels instead of pixels is going to melt all of Greenland. So like there's unsolved challenges to this space that I think an AI developer, I would personally think that having that kind of skill added to your team would very, very much step up your ability to get traction in the VC industry.
That's right. We have one advisor who is like PhD in machine learning, and we constantly reach out to them and he was the early one doing like very like architectural applications using large language models way before then this was hot. So
That's awesome. And then the last piece of advice I would say about how I, in addition to having my first engineer who was very skilled and had a long resume, and then I also had my answer for why am I the absolute best person to pursue Modumate, the depth and clarity with which I was able to speak about the algorithms that draftspeople go through and what type of data model should exist to procedurally address those algorithms so that you could unpack all dimensions, unpack all drawing series automatically. I could just regale our investors for hours in detail about that. No question they asked about product strategy or like technical design was I unable to answer even in the early stages. So that kind of clarity is where, yeah, lots of other people were building plugins for Revit, but nobody saw the forest for the trees the way that I had, is their position on things. I'm not trying to say that's true. I definitely have flaws too, but I think our team had a very strong individual expertise on our sides of the podium, product vision, technology vision. And then the last piece of the formula that really got a lot of early conversation investors to take things seriously was our first body of customer traction. We put up a website, said, this is what we will do for you. Please pre-order. $250 now gets you, or $60 now gets you a full year of a soon to be $500 product, for example. And after spending $10,000 of Facebook ads, we got back $25,000 in pre-orders. And that kind of profitable funnel indicated a lot of latent customer demand that I think I proved to investors, A, that the customers would put money where their mouth is, B, that somebody like me is more than just somebody who talks about dimensions all day, but actually also can build a business. And that's the very first example of the iteration loop towards building a business, that they're like, you're going to have to do 20 more of those loops between now and your next stage. But, I'm willing to bet on you now. So whatever traction you can build up, you said 500 users. If you think any of them are sticking, if any of them are repeating customers, ask them for interviews, ask them for pre-orders, put forth the greater vision. If you have one, ask for pre-orders on that. But if what you want is just to prove that your current tool is ready for an initial use case and grow from there, gather more data, enrich the compellingness of that current product market fit. And if it's not there, then of course, keep your head down and keep building until either the vision has grown to a sellable point or your traction's grown to a sellable point.
this is great. Like, I feel a bit roasted, but I am learning a lot. I
Good.
appreciate the clarity and the whole transparent feedback. I'm conscious about your time, so I'll wrap up with last few questions. Uh, if you go back in time and give advice to yourself when you were starting Modumate, what would you do differently?
I would be starting conversations earlier. I personally think I viewed my network building and product building sides to my personality as a bit of a switch to flip on or off. And really, they both should be happening at all times. So instead of putting my head so far down that I go away for months and then suddenly my relevant contacts hear from me again, it's probably better, amongst my investors, I send them updates very frequently, but I didn't really check in with each one on a deep level as often as I think I would have liked to. Every time I did, I learned something really deep, and I was reminded how impressive and experienced my advisors and investors are. And so to go a year before a one-on-one conversation when you could actually get their time every quarter, that is important time. So I think that being somebody who's obsessed about their own product caused me to put my head down more than it should have been. And then also prepare for a long journey. I think anybody can hear that it's going to take 5 to 10 years to build a successful, high impact startup. And, I was 26 when this venture began, and now I am 32 and I have a 9-month-old son here at home. And, career changes for my wife as well. And generally just a changing lens on life. It definitely is you get married to your startup in as much as everything else in your life. and you're going to grow as a person a tremendous amount, and you better make sure that you can still check in with that spouse of yours, the startup, and find ways to keep loving it. That was definitely, in certain moments, the odds were against us, for example, or a problem seemed insolvable, and it's important to like fall back in love with it. Which be prepared to be unprepared for how the different you might not see that relationship, and need some put in some work to fall back in love with it. Otherwise, you might find yourself burning out after 2 years. And I've met many friends of mine have founded companies where the light got snuffed out in only 2 or 3 years.
I see. And like, was there any lowest point in like this whole journey, and like how did you mentally went through that phase?
I think that building a company starting in 2017 means that I was building it in the beginning of the peak of a bull run. And so there's definitely, I think the most interesting and densest period of learning for me has been the market correction towards more of this bear market that we're currently in, and the change in priorities where, engagement and revenue are the two classic ways to measure traction of a product. And when money is cheap, insofar as there's low inflation and low interest rates, so lending money that may take a while to pay back is not super costly. Paying for a product that has engagements is a good substitute for revenue. That product is probably also going to make you a lot of money in the end relative to the cost of your interest and inflation. In an environment with high interest and inflation, if you give a company money today that isn't making money back, compared to one that is making money back, a year later, your money may have been devalued by 10% if inflation were 10%, whatever, it's 5, 6%. But over many years, that compounds. And the interest rate you're paying on the loan that may exist upstream of that investment is also higher because of the interest rates. So the companies you invest in had better damn well be making money today. And that kind of change in priorities is something that has educated me greatly as a business builder. So I'm grateful to have been able to build this business in both types of markets and not just have the easy road of, yeah, don't worry about making money. Revenue, engagement is a fine substitute. And so are testimonials from customers who love your vision. If you make money eventually, that's all we need to hear. No, I think that if I had experienced that only, then my tools for figuring out strong business choices wouldn't be fully fledged. Having to make money is a very important skill.
Got it. Any bold predictions for next 3 years?
The next 3 years of Revit releases will also feature no more exciting than dark mode. Dark mode is going to continue to be an example of the level of investment in Revit's core feature set that Autodesk puts in. And Revit will continue to be the core source of pain for architects. Anything bold, I bet the wishy-washiest and least semantic parts of architectural workflow will be gobbled up in 3 years or less by generative AI applications, whether that is just distilling the word garbage that comes out of architects' mouths into some kind of an actual, like if there's a long blurb about post-occupancy surveys or customer feedback or something, and you got to distill that down to some takeaways, Gen AI could do that. That's a little shallow, unsemantic problem in an architect's life, and Gen AI can take it over. And making 3D renderings, I see certainly your initial product vision, that type of kind of shallow output, ripe opportunity. So I think I'm very excited about your product vision. And the question in my mind is, how do you take those shallow little pains and nibble downward towards the core pains of representing a building soup to nuts, which is what architects do most of their work on. And maybe Gen AI is an avenue towards that. Maybe a polyhedral graph with an algorithm library. Who knows?
Damn, if you guys are giving API, we could integrate and automate
Yeah.
directly
Let's
from
have a
the
jam
word.
session.
Yeah. This is great. Anything which we didn't discuss and you would like to end on that note?
No, just for anybody still working, anybody working on designing buildings right now. I greatly respect the work you do. I am so thankful thankful that people with your expertise exist in the world. You are working in the world's most impactful industry, and do not discredit the value of the expertise you're building, even if kind of entrepreneurs tend to step outside of that and talk about you all like you're a market instead of a bunch of people. You're not a market. You're a bunch of people who have very amazing individual strengths, individual situations. And I hope for the best of you being able to take that expertise and turn it into impact, whether for your employer or for your own venture of some sort.
Awesome. Rit- I really loved the whole show and the work you are doing and the advice you shared. So looking forward what Modumate is gonna release next and the features you have. So
My pleasure, Mayor. Great to meet you as well. And I'm sure we'll be in touch moving forward.
yeah.